Hey everybody, it's Charlie again, the Commie Preacher, here at the Church of the Revolution YouTube channel, where we say that Jesus was a communist. And our goal here is to nothing less than transforming how the world understands Jesus. Because Jesus is the most beloved human character in all of history. In all of history, the story of Jesus as told in the four Gospels is the story that has convinced people that Jesus is God himself. Now, I don't know that Jesus is God himself, and that's not important, because what matters to me is that story leads you to communism. If you truly take the story of the life of Jesus seriously, study it, understand what he said about property, about wealth, you will come to the conclusion that Jesus was a communist. So today's video is going to be on the topic, communism is heaven on earth. Let me say that again. Communism is heaven on earth. Now, I got in an argument this week with actually my own wife. We were scrolling through some channels. We were actually at a hotel. We spent the night in a hotel because every now and then you just got to get away from where you're living to somewhere else. We've been pandemic confined for literally months, and we just decided we're going to go to a hotel for 2 nights. And we were just scrolling through the cable channels, because we don't have cable. We have we use streaming for TV, but we were scrolling through the channels, and there was this Catholic channel called the Eternal Word Network, and EWTN. And the priest on there was saying that, well, so heaven's not just a state of mind. This was a question from a viewer. Is heaven just a state of mind? He said, no, heaven's not a state of mind. Heaven is a place. Heaven is where when your body is resurrected at the judgment day, and if you are a part of Jesus and a follower of Jesus, your body will go to heaven. And if you are not, your body will go to hell. And I really hate that. I think that's totally wrong. And I'm going to prove it here. We're going to talk about this. What does the Bible say, and what does Jesus say about where heaven, or I should say where heaven, yes, where the divine regime, Jesus talked about a divine regime that in one era of our history, particularly the British, the era of the British monarchy and the British Empire, they translated a phrase in the Greek, basileia hoarano, or basileia hotheo. They translated that as kingdom of God, which kingdom, monarchy, right? That's why they use that word. But it's not, the word doesn't mean monarchy. The word simply means regime, which of course in French is the French word for kingdom. But we'll let that aside. When you hear the word regime, you don't think king, we don't think monarchy, because the word has taken on different connotations. So I like to say that what Jesus was talking about was a divine regime, a universal regime, a heavenly regime, but heavenly just means universal. It just, you look up at the heavens and you see the stars and they, are regular and peaceful and beautiful. That's heaven. That's what the idea of heaven meant in the time of Jesus. It didn't mean a place that wasn't physical where you went when you died, where somehow your soul escaped your body and you went there. And I also don't agree with that priest who said that when your body is resurrected, you're either going to go to heaven or you're going to go to hell. It's not quite that simple. And in fact, where does your body go at the resurrection? Now, I'll bet, since I've been very open, that you can be an atheist and believe Jesus was a communist, that some of you say, well, I don't even believe in the resurrection. That's fine. That's totally fine. You can interpret the resurrection as a spiritual belief. That is not an uncommon belief. The official Christian churches, the Catholic, the Eastern Orthodox, the Episcopal, the Presbyterians, have all rejected the idea that the resurrection was spiritual, not bodily. But I think there's certainly some way to understand the resurrection as a spiritual renewal. But we're not really getting into that. The real question is communism heaven on earth? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And we're going to talk about that right now. So we're going to go to the book of Revelation, which is the last book in the Bible. It's also called the Apocalypse of John, or the Apocalypse of Jesus, because John claimed to be writing what angels and Jesus himself would said to him. So it's the apocalypse of John, of Jesus. And we don't know who this John was. Some people think it was the same guy who wrote the Gospel of John, but I think that's unlikely. In fact, I think we don't know who wrote the Gospel of John either, because the name John doesn't appear as, this is the Gospel according to John, it doesn't appear in the original Greek. So we don't know who wrote the Gospel of John. And we don't really know who this John was, because this book does say it is the revelation of John, the revelation of Jesus Christ to John, is how the book titled itself in the original text. And so John said he was a prisoner. He was on the island of Patmos. Patmos was a Greek island that was used as a prison colony. And John said he was there because of his faith, because he was a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. He was in prison. And on this island, he begins to have these enormous, magnificent visions, scary, terrifying visions of dragons and beasts of the sea and war in the heavens and so on. And this is all, I would say, a symbolic book. But it's interesting how the book ends. Because the book ends, I would argue, with communism as heaven on earth. So here's what I'm going to read. We're going to go to John chapter 20, the Revelation or the Apocalypse, chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The former heavens, the former earth had passed away, and the sea existed no longer. I also saw a new Jerusalem, the holy city, coming down out of heaven from God, beautiful as a bride and groom on their wedding day. And I heard a loud voice calling from the throne, "Look, God's tabernacle is now among humankind. God will live with them. They will be God's people, and God will be fully present among them. The Most High will wipe away every tear from their eye. Death, mourning, crying, and pain will be no more, for the old order has fallen." So I want you to notice what happened in that passage at the level is that this new Jerusalem, this city, came out of heaven and landed on the new earth. Now, what does it mean to say there was a new heaven and a new earth? Does it mean that the stars disappeared or that the entire sphere of the earth disappeared? You got to understand, they didn't think about the earth as a sphere. Now, there's some people who knew the earth was round, but if you told them it was this gigantic sphere, they might not have believed you. That's outside their experience. They didn't have, we didn't have the science. The ancient Greeks did believe the earth was round, and we know from their geometric, at least some are ancient Greeks, using geometry, figured out that the earth was round. We know that this actually was done by ancient Greek scientists, early Greek scientists. But when it says that there was a new heaven and a new earth, you got to remember where John is. He's on a little island in the Mediterranean called Patmos. He is having visions about Jesus and about the future and also about the present. He's having visions about the present. And so when he says there's a new heaven, new earth, it's basically saying the island that I'm on is part of the land mass. That whole land mass will be transformed. It will be what is now will become old, will become past, and there will be a new land and a new earth. And one of the things that I like to understand this text is saying is that the devastation that had been wrought, because there's a war described in the book of Revelation, that war, once that war is won by the forces of good, by the forces of Jesus, the communism of Jesus, once that war is won, the earth will be transformed. So yes, it will be a new earth. It will be as if brand new, because the Amazon rainforest will be regrown. There will be new forests everywhere. There will be so much more ecological harmony. So that's what I understand the new earth is a renewed, transformed surface of our planet. I don't believe the globe, the entire sphere upon which we live, is somehow wiped out by God. I believe that the age-long struggle for the communism of love will be won, and the earth will be transformed through the communism of love. And that's what I take this story about the holy city coming out. And it's interesting, the descriptions of the city. The angel took me away in the spirit to the top of a very high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. Again, out of heaven, it lands on earth. Heaven isn't a place not on earth that you go to when your body is resurrected or your soul flies to when you die. Heaven, where your body goes when resurrection occurs, and again, we could say resurrection is a spiritual term, and there's also a bodily component, because I believe that in a certain sense, the technology will one day exist that we can bring back everyone who's ever died. And the only question is will we, and what will we use to decide to bring back everyone who has ever died? How will we decide? How will we, the planet Earth can't really sustain all those people, and maybe we'll have to build cities in space or cities on the ocean, or we'll have to do something to put, if we bring back everyone who ever died and they come back in an immortal form because we give them new immortal bodies through technology, that to me is a resurrection. But I'm not going to push that here. What I want to talk about is that even in the Bible, when they had no concept of technological, the technological ability to completely change everything that we have now, we can imagine technologies of immortality. They couldn't imagine technologies of immortality, but they could imagine God miraculously resurrecting everyone from the dead. And so that's what they held on to, because that's as far as their imaginations could go. They could only go so far. They could only say, well, if God is really good, if God is going to make all the evil and suffering and oppression that we've been enduring for all of our lives, if God is going to make that right, if God is going to prove that God is good, that the one who created the earth, the one who created humanity is actually a good being, then we have to win over the systems of domination, the systems of death that have been oppressing humanity for almost all of its history, or at least all of its recorded history. Bear in mind that for a long time, humanity simply lived, in the savannas of Africa and in the mountains. We lived in this much more clan-like, primitive communist state. That's where we emerged as communists. I believe in the doctrine of primitive communism, which Marx and Engels taught, and that's where humanity comes from. And what happened is the agricultural revolution led to the enslavement of the majority of humanity in order to serve the minority and the elite that had power and had wealth. And they forced them to work on their, agriculturally, and basically turned them into serfs and slaves. The majority of humanity in the agricultural revolution area, as well as in the imperial area, like the imperial era of the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, those empires were empires in which almost everyone, or at least over half the populations, were enslaved to serve the agricultural needs of society. And so prior to all of that history, prior to the agricultural revolution, humanity lived in a much closer harmony with nature, and a much closer harmony with our true nature as free, intelligent beings. And it's only when we reach this particular population mass and we could no longer simply sustain ourselves on, horticulture and hunter and gathering. We had to come up with something else. But what happened is that a certain wealthy elite said, hey, why don't we just enslave everybody so that they'll work on these farms? All right. So now here we are talking about the future of humanity, and that we want to overthrow capitalism and institute communism. And this is the dream. This is the vision. This is fulfilling humanity's nature, fulfilling humanity's destiny by creating a global regime of the communism of love. And I want to be clear, I don't use the term communism of love to attack, the other kinds of the communism of secularism, which is a political communism. Nothing wrong with political communism. The communism of love includes apolitical communism. And I certainly have what I consider a balanced critique of what occurred in the Bolshevik Revolution, what occurred in the Chinese Revolution under Mao, and what's occurred in, the Cuban Revolution and others. I aim for balance. I aim to not completely dismiss, and I also aim to not uncritically embrace what occurred in all those previous revolutions. They were attempts to make real communism in certain places in time and history. But what I live for is the global victory of the communism of love, which will also be a political and an economic communism. And I would argue that that is what Jesus called for. And if you have trouble with the claim that Jesus was a communist, go and listen to my 2 videos. I've done 3 videos. The first one is very brief, sort of a summary, but then the other 2 are more extensive, where I go through the Gospel of Luke and pull out the threads, the sayings, the teachings, the incidents in the Gospel of Luke and in the book of Acts that point towards communism. But here in the book of Revelation, we have this New Jerusalem, this heavenly city coming out and landing on earth, and then it is like a precious jewel. The walls are huge, they're tall. There are 12 gates with 12 angels as sentinels, and on the 12 gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. 3 of its gates faced east, 3 north, 3 south, 3 west. The wall had 12 foundation stones on which were written the names of the Lamb's 12 apostles. The angels who talked with me carried a gold measuring rod to measure the city, its gates, and its walls. And the city was laid out 4 square. It was as long as it was wide. So this is essentially a cube. The walls were made of jasper, the city pure gold, pure as glass. The foundation stones of the city were decorated with every kind of precious stone. And the streets were pure gold, as pure as glass. So transparent gold. All right. And I want to go back to that initial description where it says every tear will be wiped away. Because this is what communism for me is about. I just say it's the communism of love, or love's communism. And it is about eliminating unnecessary human suffering, of which humanity has lived for most of our recorded history, when, as I say, these elite, wealthy, powerful elites took over and said, let's create an agricultural revolution and enslave most of the humans. And every empire since then has enslaved most of the humanity that it could. And it's only in the 19th century that this movement to abolish slavery began. And we had serfdom, and we've had a variety of different economic systems, but now here we're under global capitalism. Capitalism began in Western Europe and has spread around the world, and this really has only occurred in our lifetime. It hadn't even occurred in the lifetime of Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels, or even the lifetime of Lenin. Lenin talked about it, imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism, which is colonialism, which is taking over the entire world and imposing capitalist economic rules and laws on every nation on earth. And we are essentially at that point. Even China now, for the most part, operates as a capitalist economy. They are nominally communist in their party, and they do claim to be Marxist and Leninist, but to me, they're not working very hard at eliminating capitalism. There are people who will argue and defend, and as I say, I try to take a balanced, undogmatic approach to things like China, things like Cuba, states like China, states like Vietnam, states like, the Bolshevik, the Soviet Union. There were pluses and minuses. There were successes and failures in all of these attempts to create communism. And we should not, I think, elevate any one of these attempts to sort of the one and only. I am a Trotskyist. I am a Maoist. I am a Fidelist. I am a, Sandinista. Whatever variety and flavor you want to become of a communist, I try to be a non-dogmatic communist. I try not to say, oh, Mao was the highest stage of communist struggle. It was an important stage of communist struggle, but I don't think it qualifies as the final stage of communist struggle. I think there's a stage beyond Maoism, and I don't really know what it is. It's going to be global, let's hope, because China was the biggest nation, bigger than Russia. Russia was a pretty big nation that went communist, and then China went communist. And those are gigantic, but they're still not big enough because capitalism was able to encircle China and prevent it from truly achieving socialism and communism. And the same thing occurred to Russia, and the same thing occurs to Cuba and any other communist-run country, is that they are encircled by capitalism and they cannot avoid it. They may try, but we're now, I believe, on the cusp of a global communist revolution. I believe it has to happen in the next decade or two at most, or we will irreparably destroy the earth. And if you were paying attention when I was talking about the book of Revelation, the apocalypse, there is a war on earth between the forces of freedom and justice and liberation and the forces of tyranny and slavery and destruction. And that's actually happening. It's actually unfolding in our time, that we are headed towards World War III, in which the capitalist nations of the earth are going to find themselves at odds with the poor, oppressed, and working masses of their own nations. And the masses will have to find their unity and throw off the chains and bonds of capitalism and begin creating this new heaven and new earth. Now, the New Jerusalem, which I say is a symbol of communism, comes down out of the heavens. Do I literally believe it's going to come down out of heaven? Well, maybe if I'm allowed to use science fiction. We can send our rockets up there. We can send a lot of material, all these precious stones, and we can sort of create the New Jerusalem up in orbit around Earth, and then set some gravity repulsors on it, and it'll land gently on Earth. I don't believe that. The story is symbolic. You got to be careful of taking it too literally. The New Jerusalem is simply a symbol of communism, a symbol of the perfection of human potential, the perfection of the divine gift that we are, the divine image. We are in the image of the divine being. We've done all kinds of horrible stuff, and in a certain sense, God has done horrible stuff. If you want to know what I mean by that, you can watch my previous video about God. Is God an asshole? You'll watch it. And I address that some of the stories in the Bible, God does come off as an asshole. And so, but most of the stories in the Bible are not actually literally about God. They are about what people thought about God. And you got to keep that in mind. Doesn't mean the stories are wrong. They might be right, that God is a certain way. But communism, as a theological, philosophical, religious, political, social, economic vision, takes a certain side in human affairs. We are for freedom. We are for equality. We are for justice. We are for democracy, a radical democracy. We are for the abolition of patriarchy, the abolition of white supremacy, and for the liberation of all humanity, living in freedom, living in equality, living in justice. This is what communism is about, and I argue that for me, I came to that position because I was dedicated to the life of Jesus, to following Jesus, who said that he came to liberate the poor. So yes, communism is heaven on earth. And Jesus, and sorry about the shadows. I don't know what's going on. Usually I don't have this bad of a shadow. Maybe I do, and I just haven't noticed before. But so far I like this video. So far I like where I'm going with this. I'm going to keep this video, even if it, probably could use some improvement. I'm just getting started. This is my 10th video for the YouTube Commie Preacher Church of the Revolution channel. It's my 10th video, and I'm really excited to do my 10th video. And I'm going to keep doing them. I'm trying to try to do 2 videos a week or 3, but it's been very difficult this past week to do any more than 1. And I will try to do more as time goes on, as time permits. I will try to get more videos done. Thank you for coming. Remember that communism is heaven on earth. And humanity and all the living species of this earth, I am not a speciesist. I believe that we should liberate animals. We should liberate every living species from oppression, exploitation. We should totally give animals freedom and rights. The future will be vegan. I really believe that. I'm not a vegan today, but I'm very sympathetic to veganism, and maybe someday I'll get over my addiction to cheese and seafood and I'll become a vegan. I'm not there yet. My children are there, and they'll probably push me that way. I believe in transforming the world through love. The reason I want to transform the world is because I love the poor, because I love the majority of humanity. I think the majority of humanity, as flawed as they are still the most amazing beings and they're wonderful. And I believe the same thing about animal species. I believe, dogs, cats, horses, lions, tigers, and bears, and monkeys and apes and armadillos. I mean, I'm from Texas. Every animal species has a beauty. Every plant species, every microbe, every bacteria, they have a reason for existence. And we as humans are tasked, because we are the smartest creature, at least in a certain sense, we are the smartest creature, are tasked with creating a paradise on earth. And to me, that paradise is the communism of love, which will be eco-socialist. It will not be speciesist, and I say it will be vegan. We will no longer need to eat other animals to live. We will, plants is all, but we could even move to totally synthetic forms of food, and I totally would continue to eat that way if it meant less suffering. Communism is heaven on earth, and I appreciate you for coming to this channel. Please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. Click, subscribe, click the bell to get a notification, and then go to my Patreon page and consider being a supporter for the low introductory rate of $1 a month, or $10 or $20, whatever you would like to give, or make one-time donations. I totally accept all of that. You can find out more about me on Facebook, Church of the Revolution group and page on Facebook. All of this will be in the comments here, in the below, not the comments, the description of the video. Have a great whatever the rest of your day is going to be like. And if you want to be, if you already are a communist, it's great. If you're not a communist, but you're exploring it and you think something I have to say could help you become a communist, please send me a comment, send me an email. All this information is going to be in the video description for how you can contact us and become part of the building of the Church of the Revolution. Red love, everybody. Good night.